moderator at this session, but evidently he air-dashed to Delhi a few hours ago. And air-dash is one of those words that sort of went out with liberalization. And I need to confess that sort of I am not worthy to be sharing the stage with Rana Dasgupta. His is a major work, the equivalent, I think, of what Suketu's maximum city was to Bombay. Rana has written for Delhi. My book, on the other hand, as you will see, is minimum city. It's much smaller. But we do sort of have a few points of congruence in our books. And Rana's book is called Capital, and he'll tell you why. But it's much about sort of the city before, after liberalization, the city in which people don't air-dash anymore. So, Rana, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Upset that while my mic is off, you steal a charge on me by in these kind of ways. He's now the charming one, and thank you for welcoming me to Bombay. It's a very different world here. And when I just was coming in the taxi, I saw that incredibly charming festival being set up on the seafront in Rana. And it's charming to somebody coming from Delhi because there's a sort of calm faith that it displays in public space, which in Delhi we just don't have. I mean, that idea of the public is a very different idea here and there. It's something we could possibly talk about later, which is that different cities have very different ways of speaking to you and asking you to be part of them. And for Delhi and Bombay, they're fundamentally different. One of the differences is this idea of the rights you have as a member of this city, Bombay, to participate in it and be part of its public. This book, my book, however, is about Delhi, and one of the distinctions that it makes between Bombay and Delhi is particularly explained by the fact of partition. And the fact that it's a refugee city, the modern city was founded by refugees coming there in 1947. And that, to me, explains a lot of why the city is as it is. The other thing that explains a lot of why the city is as it is, of course, is that it's the federal capital, it's the seat of national politics. And that a lot of people who've drifted there in the last 20 or 30 years are people who've drifted there in order to be part of that political world, especially business people who have needed access to politics in order to grow their businesses and further their commercial objectives. Which has given Delhi, both of these things together have given a culture of extremes of atomism, suspicion of others, desire to get ahead, networking and corruption, which I think has meant that we in Delhi have a much weaker sense of the collective than you in Bombay, where there's not much that binds two people just because they happen to live in Delhi. Whereas I think there are things that bind two people because they live in Bombay. You may disagree. Because we've tragically lost our moderator, we're going to each read for a bit and then discuss, and we're going to give longer to questions and answers. So I'm going to read from the very beginning of my book, which is called Landscape, and needs no explanation. March is the prettiest month, bringing flawless blooms to the dower frangipanis, which are placed artfully around the compound in pleasing congruity with the posted security guards, who wave me on as I drive up to the house. The day is done. Evening flowers have come into their own, and the air tides with scent. Ahead of me, under a velvet sky, the glass mansion glows like a giant yellow aquarium. I park my car according to instructions and walk out along the low-lit paths. At every corner, a guard awaits and directs me to the next. They pass me on, the guards, one to another, with walkie-talkie confirmations crackling back down the line. I arrive at the house. The building is like two space stations, one glass and one stone, crossing over each other. One of them floats free of the earth, a shining bridge to nowhere, its underside glinting with landing beacons. Everything is improbably pristine. The corners are straight and sharp. No gravel spills from the decorative channels that border the path. The guards instruct me to walk through the house to the swimming pool at the back. They indicate a spot-lit passageway. The sliding doors are drawn half across, blocking one side of the entrance. I set off through the other open side, and do I hear the guards' warning cries before or after, walk straight into a sheet of plate glass. So clean and so non-reflective that even though I've just staggered back from it, even though I've just bent double, clutching my crumpled nose, I still cannot tell it's there. The guards are laughing. One of them runs to assist the idiot visitor. He advises me to enter the passage not through the glass, but through the door. A normal door, nothing sliding about it. He demonstrates to me how a door works, so that I do not injure myself again. I pass through the house. A hall sweeps away from me, done up like a designer hotel. Velvet lampshades in high-frequency colours hang from the high ceiling. Designer couches are clustered here and there around crystal tables. On the walls hang enormous canvases painted with the kind of energetic soft porn you see on posters for DJ dance nights. Lounge music plays from speakers hidden throughout the building. I come out on the other side of the house where everything is lit by that secret erotic blue that rises from private pools at night. I am led to a poolside seat. A glass is placed in front of me with a concealed bottle of water. Sir will be with you in a minute. I'm reading on page and a half. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? You're very quiet. I wish the people would move forward as well. I feel like I'm sort of projecting to the moon out here. In a city of euphemisms, this place is called a farmhouse. Nothing is farmed here, of course. But when in the 1970s the Delhi elite began seizing swathes of land to the south of the city to build private estates, the entire belt was reserved, according to the regulations, for agriculture, and with a pang of propriety that touched the names of things, even if it could not touch the things themselves. They called their new mansions farmhouses. This was especially important since many of the first farmhouses were built by the very bureaucrats and politicians who had made the regulations. Severely correct individuals for whom irregularities in the names of things were an offence to the dignity of their office. In the decades since then, the farmhouses to the south of Delhi have not only increased in number, changed hands several times, and ultimately acquired the legitimacy that accrues to every land grab once enough time has passed. They have also come to epitomise the lives of the city's rich and well-connected, whose astonishing parties, car collections, sculpture gardens, and loping Australian wildlife would be inconceivable except in the context of such fantastic estates. In no other Indian metropolis does the urban elite bask in such pastoral tranquility. This is an idiosyncrasy of the capital. It is striking, in fact, how Delhi's rich, a quintessentially metropolitan group of people, who have made their money by tirelessly networking the capital's many clubs and corridors, eschew the urbane. They do not, as the rich do in Mumbai or New York, dream of apartments with sparkling views of the city from which their fortune derives. They are not drawn to that energy of streets, sidewalks, and bustle, which was so heroic a part of great 19th and 20th century cities. No, the Delhi rich like to wake up looking at empty manicured lawns, stretching away to walls topped with barbed wire. And I think I'll stop there and give you the stage. Thank you.
Well, your opening remarks sort of made me think about, what's been in the papers a lot over the last couple of weeks. The Prime Minister came to Bombay to open a new terminal of the airport, the T2. And I've been following the press releases with some amazement and some amusement. And so they were full of these figures that it will have 5,000 square meters of landscape garden, that it will have 21,000 square meters of luxury retail space. And it also told us that this new terminal of the airport, which will be used by 40 million people every year, has 101 toilet blocks. You know, this is the T2 terminal of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Airport. In Bombay, we name everything after Shivaji. And it made me think of that other Shivaji terminal, the railway station, which used to be called VT. And that railway terminal is used by about 3.75 million people every day. So every 11 days, it sees the kind of volumes that you have going through the T2 terminal every year. But those people have access to 83 toilets, not toilet blocks, 83 single toilet stalls. If you're a woman, it's even worse because you have access to only 10 toilets in Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminal. And you know, in its time, VT, Chhatrapati Shivaji Terminal, was...
Maybe plane travel is just simply more prolific.
Yeah. But you know, sort of in its time, T2 was sort of, the CST was the T2 of its time. It was sort of state of the art. It had even had state of the art. And when you go to the facade and look up, there are sort of squirrels and little birds dancing and gargoyles. And you know, that stuff was supervised by Lockwood Kipling, who was the principal of the JJ School of Art, who was Rudyard Kipling's father. And even the new airport, among the things the press releases tell us, is that it has a lot of art. It's got 6,000 pieces of art, which range from sort of the biggest names in contemporary art to stuff they've collected back in the 6th century. And the press releases tell us that this is India's largest exhibition of public art. And this sort of just got me thinking. In Bombay, despite what you see at the sort of at the worldly sea face, I think we're really losing sense of what public means. We believe that an art exhibition can be public even if you can access it only by buying an international air ticket. And this is sort of among the questions I look at in my book. What's happened to Bombay in the 20 years of liberalization? I think it's becoming a city in which people are increasingly, and especially those of our class, are shopping in malls, traveling. We've abandoned public transport for private cars. And so among the things I consider, and I think we're quite literally losing the common ground on which to make common cause. And I'm sort of interested in what this means for urban politics. But maybe I'll read a short passage from my book, sort of again from the beginning. For months, the front pages had warned of imminent doom. Bombay was reeling under an explosion of pollution, crowds and noise, noted one pessimist. Predicted another. The urban landscape of Mumbai, with its ever-increasing vehicular and population growth, is a nightmare for everybody. And the nightmare will only worsen every year. Such a barrage of despair would have spooked the residents of most cities, but these forecasts were especially unnerving because they were contained in front-page advertisements aimed at getting people to pay outrageous amounts of money to actually live in Bombay. Every day in the Times of India and DNA, in Midday and the Hindustan Times, the real estate firms constructing Bombay's present were proclaiming with disarming candor that they had no faith in its future. But even as they expressed exasperation with the problems that were besetting contemporary Bombay, the developers proposed a simple solution: complete retreat. They were encouraging residents to sequester themselves in housing complexes with names like Vasant Oasis, reside at newer heights of happiness, Rodas Enclave, where a refreshing lifestyle flourishes, and Marathon Next Zone, next generation eco-friendly extra utility homes. Some housing complexes offered as sanctuaries bore names suggesting that they had seceded from Bombay altogether. Kohinoor City in Kurla was in a class of its own. Sports City in Thane was a mini metropolis that offered its residents world-class sporting facilities. Rising City in Ghatkopar was the answer to Mumbai's need for space in a green environment. Amidst these expensive propositions for alternative cities, the pitch for one complex in Wadala caught my eye for the artful manner in which it had appropriated one of the city's most resilient foundational myths. The headline of one of its advertisements gloated, "The eighth island of Mumbai discriminates." As every schoolchild is taught, A large portion of contemporary Bombay has been conjured up over the centuries by reclaiming the tidal creeks separating the 7 apocryphal islands that the Greeks are believed to have known as Heptanasia. This conjoined land was settled by the most diverse collection of people the subcontinent had ever known, who proceeded to create a mishmash culture that perfectly reflected their heterogeneity and their verve. This aspect of Bombay culture can best be understood by eavesdropping on the conversations surging through its streets. When Bombayites pick arguments with, make purchases from, or proposition strangers with whom they share no common tongue, they do so in an argot that amalgamates the syntax and vocabulary of half a dozen linguistic traditions. It wraps Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, Marathi, and English into the embrace of a dialect Salman Rushdie named Hugme. Bombay's aptitude for aggregation can also be tasted in the snacks sold on its footpaths. Chinese bale, Szechuan idlis, and cheese dosas are made with ingredients blended together with a large dollop of enterprise that share the skillet only in this city. Even though these ensembles seem ungainly to some, Bombay has, over the last 200 years, held India in thrall. For in addition to inventing snacks and slang, the proud denizens of the metropolis, reclaimed from ocean and iniquity, have specialized in producing a commodity that is rather more incandescent. The city of interlocked islands, it's widely acknowledged, is the place that manufactures India's dreams. The idea of India was born in Bombay in 1885, when the Indian National Congress held its first meeting in Gwalior Tank. The notion that workers deserved a fair deal followed in 1890, when the first Indian trade union was formed in the Mill District. For a century, the Bombay film industry has been projecting visions of egalitarianism and meritocracy and love marriages into the heartland, suggesting that any adversity can be overcome if you work hard enough and dance around a tree in the appropriate fashion. To be fair, not all Bombay fabrications have been salutary. Since the 1990s, the city's financial institutions and advertising agencies have seduced India's middle classes into believing that greed is good, that empathy for the less fortunate is unnecessary, that extreme individualism is a virtue. But that stream of dreams was running dry, or so said the property developer in Wadala. Bombay's ability to keep generating India's fantasies would be imperiled unless the city's geography was completely reconfigured. Luckily, help was at hand. Keeping the meteoric growth of the city in mind, the firm claimed to have constructed not just an 8th island, but one that dwarfed the other 7. The 29-acre island city center would be an exclusive integrated enclave of branded residences and service departments, of business centers and shopping malls that even had the capacity to expand time at will. Freed from the morass of a traffic-snarled city, residents would get to pack a weekend into every weekday. They would get private roads, temperature-controlled lobbies, and separate service elevators to ensure that the service staff remains largely invisible. Could I too discover a better life, as the copywriter had urged? When I called to book an appointment, I was peppered with questions. Where did I work? How much did I earn? Where did I live? What was my budget? I proudly declared that I was a freelance writer from Bandra who intended to spend 3 crores on a flat, an unimaginably large sum of money that I was certain would single me out as a supremely desirable client. I was mistaken. The starting rate for flats in the complex, the representative sniffed, was 6 crores. She promised to have somebody call me back. Nobody ever did. As the headline had promised, the 8th island of Bombay did discriminate.
Binds people together into a city is actually a very pressing one, because it feels like all the energies are going the opposite direction. We are losing, and I think it's not even limited to Indian cities. It is an urban phenomenon of our times where, for various kinds of technological and architectural and philosophical, political reasons, people are losing reasons to want to live alongside each other and collaborate in all kinds of projects.
But also I would suggest that the title of your book suggests the main reason. It's capital. It's the economic system. Wouldn't you think so?
I think it's more than that in some respects, meaning that a lot of the, if one thinks back to Nehruvian times, I'm not the biggest fan in the world of Nehru, but it was very clear what it was that linked an Indian to another Indian. In fact, you were being reminded every day of what responsibilities you had towards other Indians. For instance, the obvious urban-rural split in the country, which is the subject of so much of its literature and film, people traveling in one direction or the other, was constantly, there were constant attempts to restitch that. And it's almost as if in the period post-91, it's become just one of the kinds of capitalist reliefs has been just forgetting about, or for urban people just forget about the fact they live in a 70% rural country. The countryside has simply dropped out of the iconography of the urban iconography. People don't really see the fact that this at all. So I think there are obvious financial reasons why catering to people according to their financial bracket and separating them from people who are in other financial brackets is part of a capitalist logic. But I think that there's other stuff as well, which is to do with the way that our cities and this country has embraced capitalism. And that's not just an economic question. It comes out of the history with which we hit 1991.
No, quite so. Though this question of sort of the migrant in the city has always I've been thinking a lot about that, because there's a whole sort of propaganda machine now sort of going, which suggests that India needs 500 new cities or something like that, and that the only way for us to move forward is to urbanize. And there's a curious paradox built into this, because first, of course, cities can't just be built. They need reasons to exist. And in Bombay, we see that really quite clearly, where in the 1960s, we built a twin city across the water, New Bombay. And New Bombay depopulated and empty for years and years until they connected it with a train line to the old city of Bombay. And now it functions as a dormitory town, and then things began to move there. So cities, I think, sort of can't be conjured out of nothing. Cities are an accretion of economic and social reasons over time. Our city, for instance, is built on the water and was a port, and that's why people came here. Delhi was at the crossroads of so many conquerors, and a trading city in some way that brought people there. But the second bit of this paradox is that the same sort of people who believe that we need to be urbanized, that we sort of need this sort of neoliberalism is the only way for India to move forward, don't see the role of the state in creating housing and the infrastructure necessary for migrants who are being driven off the land by these processes to move to the city. And so these same people get very alarmed when they come to the city and they build a slum right next door. And sort of this to me is a curious thing.
I mean, the part of the story that my book tells is the story of Punjabis after 1947. And the book sort of asserts that what we label somewhat pejoratively Punjabi culture, by which we mean a superficial materialistic culture, is not actually Punjabi culture at all, but post-traumatic culture. And to illustrate that, I talk about the culture of some of my interviewees before 1947, when their idea of what Punjabi culture was very different to the contemporary usage, meaning, for instance, it was a highly literate culture. People writing poetry was part of family life. There were many languages were spoken and written. Literacy and books were highly prized within that culture. And Punjabis lived as part of the sort of ancient shared Hindu-Muslim Sikh culture of North India, in which Sufism and philosophical introspection was also part of that world. And my analysis is that for a whole group of people who left Pakistan in 1947, this approach had shown to not work. It had not averted the catastrophe that destroyed their lives. And when they remade their lives in Indian cities, they did so feeling that these effeminate pursuits of aesthetics and philosophy and language would no longer be part of their lives. They would focus on security and money, and they would not trust their neighbors, since their neighbors were the problem. They would go it alone. And the state, leaving the state out as part of their ethos. They've not wanted to depend on the state either. They've wanted to pay for their health care with their own money. They've wanted to basically do it alone. And so in the lives of many of those people came also the Sikh riots of 1984, in which you could no longer blame England or blame Pakistan. There was an internal excessive violence that was going to constantly express itself. And so even the kind of Nehruvian gentle culture of before that time was replaced with a culture where people built 10-foot walls, and they stopped sleeping in their courtyards and on their roofs. They decided that the rest of the city was an enemy that could not be trusted. And today, people who can live in compounds where they have their own electricity generation, their own security forms. I mean, security basically is one of the largest employers of the whole city. So I think with this sort of intervening period of Nehruvianism, which gave many people a utopian and cohesive reason to exist in the city, which made many people feel that service to other people, to the nation, was something they could devote their lives to, and in many ways created, albeit in a feudal kind of way, a sort of culture of responsibility, frugality, service, and other things in Delhi. For many of those people, it didn't really work out. They saw that the people who didn't do those things, who broke the rules, who were corrupt, who just wanted to make money, in the long term, those people did much better. They were able to give their kids a much better education and lifestyle. And so within a generation or two, the faith in those big abstract ideas essentially collapsed. So in Delhi, I mean, impulses you're talking about, or the tendencies you're talking about towards essentially reverting to the corporation as the best form of social organization and money as the only dependable value, has a very sort of identifiable history, but some but not all of those things will translate into Bombay.
Yeah, well, I think among the things that those of us from Bombay who look enviously at northwards the capital value is the large amounts of space, even if perhaps it's not public space, but your infrastructure, especially that metro, which I, on my occasional visits to Delhi, seem to believe would be the thing that bound Delhi together, would give it a sense of social cohesion in the way that the train, the sadly overcrowded train with its super dense crush load now every evening, gave Bombay. But in your book, you don't quite seem to think that the metro is the answer.
There is a huge obstacle to overcome, which is the culture not only created by post-partition Punjabis, but also by the British. The British created a culture that was about clubs and exclusion. And so that is still the culture of Delhi. And to overcome that and create a culture in which two Delhi people from different social classes or different religions or whatever feel that they are in this Delhi thing together, and therefore they have stuff to talk about and everything, is very rare. Maybe Anna Hazare produced such a moment. There are these moments sometimes of sort of some kind of euphoria that can overcome these sort of divisions. The metro is interesting because despite the fact it cannot overcome all these things, despite the fact that the wealthiest third or so of the population do not travel by it, and the poorest 10% of the population don't travel by it, it's very interesting what happens when you give the public something that's obviously a very valuable thing. Usually in this country in general, if anything is given to the public, it's because it's already shit. It's just terrible, and that's why you see the public basically urinating on it. That's the bargain. We're going to give you worthless things, and you're going to treat them as worthless things. In the case of the metro, a gift was given to the public that was of enormous value. it was carried out to extraordinarily high standards and provided an amazing service, and the response from the public is that the ethics in that system are completely different from the ethics in the rest of public space. People are polite to each other, they queue, it's amazing. So, and gender violence, there have not so far been these kind of things happening in the metro. It's a very interesting thing when you make an investment in the public that says we value the public. We think that the public is valuable, then the public feels like it's valuable.
You know, the metro to me has been, at least reading from afar, it's been such an important thing, like I said. Even for creating a political life in Delhi and now in Bombay, every time AAP has a demonstration, the TV channel is always telling you which metro stations are shut down, sort of almost reinforcing the image for those of us who are not there, that the metro is a great enabler of city politics. You know, I've always marked the last 20 years in Bombay by looking at the response of Bombay's middle classes to the riots of 1992 after the Babri Masjid was demolished.
This is what I was going to ask you about, how this fits in.
Yeah, so, but, you know, 900 people were killed here, and the middle class leaped into this. There are about 4 citizens' commissions that were set up, and people went to the government with detailed reports saying, this is what went wrong, and this is how you fix it. And then a group of activists started something called the Mohalla committees, where they set up these neighborhood committees in the places where the most violence had happened, in places with sort of in which violence would most likely be repeated at a future provocation. And for 20 years, these people have gone back to these neighborhoods, and they have weekly or monthly meetings. When the attacks happened at what everybody calls the attacks on the Taj, but even though more people were killed at the railway station, the middle class texted its fury. Then, much to my astonishment, about 20,000 people showed up for a demonstration at which they waved candles. But the next month in the election, nobody came out to vote, even though they said that they would never forget. In Delhi, after the provocations you all have had of especially the Delhi rape, the gang rape, you all came out and voted and put into place a new system. And I'm wondering sort of what gives Delhi its moment of energy at this point, even if some of it means people surging into the streets of Karki to beat up African women.
I spend my whole time thinking, at least everything's okay in Bombay. And you're telling me that everything's better in Delhi. You're depressing me here. Because we often say that, it's a Delhi thing. You know, it's not like this in Bombay.
It's not like that, it's worse.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. I mean, something is happening in Delhi right now which is truly extraordinary. And it's been building for the last 2 years. It's been building for a bit longer than that. I would say the first massive trigger for it was the corruption of the Commonwealth Games. Because that coincided with a realization that the boom, the wider economic boom, but also the Delhi real estate boom, was not going to continue like this. That the situation of the middle classes, where they thought that they could be basically external to politics, because politics was cleaning up the city, as it were. It was kicking all the poor out, and it was producing new real estate all the time. And it was all that time when politics was also supporting huge corporate raiding of the countryside for mines and all that kind of stuff. So the middle classes were reaping all the rewards of politics, and they didn't really feel they had many problems because they were just making more money, their stocks were rising, and all that kind of thing. That confidence about their own inexorable rise started drying up just at this time when they realized that this infrastructure they thought was being built for them and that would show what a great city they were living in. And it would advertise Delhi to the world just at the time when all these people came into town and all the TV cameras of the world beyond Delhi was actually being completely looted. And it's not just stadiums, but flyovers and general public infrastructure was being looted. It was being carried out to a terrible standard. The billions of dollars were just being added to the budget every few months because the event was being held to ransom. the real estate prices were rising like crazy because the people who were taking money out of that system were putting it back into apartments. And so the middle classes stopped being able to buy in Delhi. I mean, 10 years ago, middle class people could buy in Delhi, and now they can't. There was huge anger over all this stuff. And even the local press, which had until that point been completely in love with power and money, stopped being so, and a certain kind of compact was broken at that time. So this was followed by the Anna Hazare movement, which was the most extraordinary mass movement that anyone had seen in Delhi, and that was followed, of course, by the set of protests that followed this rape. And these two things together of political corruption or insider corruption and the vulnerability of women to a kind of rising tide of male violence against women who dared to be out, who dared to break a mold of what those men thought women should be, essentially advertised how deeply broken were our social relations. That whatever was going on, no matter how much money was being made or whatever, we were possibly living in a nightmarish society. And I think it's these things that has galvanized people over the last year, coupled with the fact that the political response has been enormously creative and interesting. I mean, what Kejriwal has put together is truly remarkable. I'm sure that there'll be many imitators of it outside India. There'll be people copying these strategies in places like Thailand or Indonesia, or all these places where there's similar middle-class fury, a similar set of entrenched elite interests, and no one has known what to do about it. But where there is a democratic infrastructure that can be used if you know how.
To me, it's always seemed that the difference again between Delhi and Bombay is the fact that Delhi has had a strong sense of student politics for the last 20 years, or I mean, for much longer. In Bombay, that's completely been broken, and so especially during the rape agitation, these organizations were in place to mobilize people. In Bombay, the unions, the student organizations, they've all been smashed. Sort of in Bombay, if there's any social organization now, it is the equivalent of your resident welfare associations here, the advanced locality management units, they're called, which essentially are interested in garbage collection. These are street committees of mainly middle-class people. It is a lot of what they do is very NIMBY stuff, not in my backyard. In Delhi, you all seem to have more organizations that reach out across class lines. It's interesting that, for instance, now even in Turkey, when the African women are being attacked, there's an artists organization, their coach, that has rallied to their support. In Bombay, we just don't have these organizations anymore.
I can't believe I'm still sitting here telling you how great Delhi is. The utopian dimension of Delhi, if there is one, I think comes very much from the fact that it is home to the headquarters of the media, academia, and the bureaucracy to some extent. I mean, that's a different kind of entity, but a lot of people are coming into town to work in these organizations from all over the country. And JNU has a very left-wing kind of ethos. Students in general have a more idealistic take on the world, but also, that apart, I mean, a lot of the people who decide that they're going to move from Bihar to Delhi, or from Tamil Nadu to Delhi because they want to be a journalist or because they want to be an academic or a student, that's a certain kind of psychological type. It means that you're quite confident about going out on your own, and possibly you wish to break the ethos that has been your parents' ethos or whatever, which means that there's a self-selection of those people going to Delhi. They're slightly more anti-establishment than the norm. And it's true that in every area of life, the presence of journalists and of students is very, very significant.
Quite so, and sort of Delhi seems now to be replicating the process that happened in Bombay in the 40s and the 50s. Of intellectuals coming from around the country and workers coming from around the country, because there was work here. You know, the great Bombay cliche is that people come here to get rich. They didn't come here to get rich. They came here because there were steady industrial jobs. Those have now disappeared, depending on whose figures you want to believe. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of Bombay work is now in the informal sector. I don't think it's a surprise, therefore, that in the last census, Bombay's population on the island city has dropped 8%. And in the Bombay region as a whole, Greater Bombay, population growth is down to its lowest point since the 1920s. And in the 1920s, we had a plague, so there weren't that many people coming to Bombay. Delhi, on the other hand, is creating many more jobs, and your population is growing. And I think that's a sign of why, unfortunately, Delhi, as that magazine title now says, is India's first city.
There's certain kinds of jobs. I mean, Bombay has a kind of, what time are we at, by the way? Delhi has no, the British built an encampment which was only for themselves. And essentially that ethos has continued. There is no place in the city for working people to live, working class people to live. Those people are needed in large numbers. They're brought into the city often on a temporary basis. They have to just make do. The city says to them, it's clear you're not welcome here, you can't stay, you have to go back. And that has been replicated also in Gurgaon. This is the ethos of the capital. There's, you know, Sanjay Gandhi's, it was very clear, like, we're just going to move these people out, they're not welcome here. So, yes, it's true that, I mean, there's enormous kind of entrepreneurial fever in Delhi. There are lots of people from many other countries who are coming to start businesses, lots of Americans and lots of French people, lots of people from all over the world are coming to do things in Delhi, to provide little services or start big businesses, to start restaurants, to start, I was going to say bookshops, no one starts bookshops, but they start things that sell, you know. So there is a lot of middle class addition to the population, people coming for all those kinds of reasons. But I think that there is, you know, I don't want to be melodramatic with words, there's a slightly fascist underpinning to a lot of this. I mean, the relationship to the poor is still very violent. I mean, you're talking about your service elevators and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the poor have been moved out. There's a chapter in my book where I have these interviews with a bunch of people who live in a slum in North Delhi, who were facing the third big demolition. So they lived in two previous, I mean, cities essentially. They built cities with their own hands. The men of the slum were trained construction workers, so they knew how to build streets and sewers and drainage systems and all that kind of thing, and houses, and they built them, and they'd been demolished twice, and now these people were in their late 50s, and they were facing this happening again, and they couldn't handle it. Even though the land they'd been moved onto was completely poisoned by a rubbish dump, even though they'd lost all their jobs, the men had turned to drugs and alcohol because only the women had anything to do, they just couldn't face this happening again to them. And the sort of psychological and physical privations these people have been put through is kind of crazy. So I think that a great city is a city that can accommodate people of all classes, and that can produce an idea of the city that is equally valid for people from all those classes. I think that a great city allows you to be poor well, and the cities where you can live poor and well, and actually consume many of the same things that rich people consume, because the city provides those things in its fabric. Those are the cities that have had staying power as sort of imaginative and cultural capitals. I think Delhi had some of that at the moment I moved to it for a very brief period of time. It was possible to live there poor and well, and as you say, there's a lot of public space. I mean, there are lots of gardens. You can walk there. You could have a pretty good time as a penniless student or whatever. Now I think those opportunities are drying up fast, and it's very deliberate, in fact, in the way that the city is organized.
This is, of course, Rana, an astonishing moment. It's a complete inversion of the usual Bombay-Delhi conversation.
Yeah.
And here we're debating, sort of, we're each racing to say, my city is worse than yours.
Yeah.
But maybe we should throw it open for questions at this stage.
Yeah, I feel you won that argument as well, I think.
Well, Tejwani, proud Mumbaiker. I'm really glad that you touched upon the fact that people who literally build the city Mumbai seldom get space to stay here. I also am very glad that you spoke about how transport, both metros as well as the local trains, literally bind people together during peak hours of traffic. Also, I would like to have your take upon the Blue Line buses as well as the BST buses in Mumbai and Delhi respectively, and how do they bring people together. The human touch that you have in a Mumbai bus is quite different from the experience that you receive in a Blue Line bus. Because there, the Tullah, he sits there up front and you have to go to him to get your ticket and things like that. Whereas here, the conductor, he comes to you and he asks you for a ticket and, would you like to buy a ticket and things. So how would you, rate that experience, since you have spoken about transport in all forms of both cities in comparison? I would like to have both your takes on the same thing.
But I think sort of what we really need to look at is that train, which is an astonishing thing. And when you get into that train, you're sort of wedged in positions of such daring intimacy as one is often not with a lover. And yet, for instance, if a woman were to get into the train with her boyfriend or her partner, as sometimes couples in love tend to do, magically an inch of space is created around them. And men are very conscious about not, touching her at all. And I think that's the difference between sort of the touch in Delhi and Bombay. And my friends who travel in Delhi, sort of my women friends, people go out of their way to touch them. And in that way, sort of, despite the incidents we've had of some very high-profile crimes against women, Bombay largely remains a safe city for women. And we have, I think, the negotiations of the daily commute in some way contribute to that. They make us conscious of other people's needs. The thing that always fascinates me in Bombay is when you get into the second-class compartment, 4 people can sit one with this half bunk, but not in the first-class compartment. And I wondered how that sort of convention arose. But you get to sit on your half bum if you're the last guy there.
I don't think in Delhi we have a larger idea than that particularly. So, in the family, in the conservative North Indian idea of how the family works, men take care of women, and that is something you see very often in public transport. You take care of women because they're your sisters or your mothers or whatever. Now this has obvious flaws, which is that women who seem not to be playing that role well deserve no protection. And the violence, my analysis is, we could talk to other people. Yes, there's a lot of groping that happens in buses and all that kind of stuff. There is something going on, but I think the violence is actually in some ways more terrible than that, but also in some ways more restrictive. And that's to say that it's kind of a war, and it's a war being waged by men who feel that their power is diminishing as they see that the power of women is rising, and their access, their mobility, socially, sexually, economically, is rising, and it's leveled at people who seem not to be the mother-sister type. It's leveled at those women who, why are they out with boyfriends at 9 o'clock? It's a punishment. So I think you have this. So that's why the advertising campaigns that ran in Delhi was so completely inappropriate, saying, think she could be your mother, or she could be. I mean, it's not about mothers. It's not about sisters. It's about human beings. And the problem is that when people they are outraged because this is somebody's mother and somebody's sister. They're missing the point that we are not concerned about these people because of their relationships to other people. We're concerned about them because they're human beings, This thing of the family, sometimes very touching. You find people taking care of you in a way that is rare in any other place I've ever lived. That they'll go out of their way to drive you home, or make sure that you spend the night at their house, all those kind of things. But the family is a metaphor for the entire political collective. It's a very inadequate metaphor, and it breaks down, and on the outside of it is unfortunately great violence sometimes.
And I want to say that whenever there was a lot of Eve teasing, and whenever we responded to it and said, don't you have a mother or a sister? What I would hear was, my mother's for my father, my sister's for her husband, and you are for me. So that mother-sister thing does not exist in North India. And the second thing is, I think the Bombayites pay all the taxes and Delhi gets the benefits.
That's actually, allow me to dispel that notion. And this is something that we Bombayites have always had a grievance about, and we say that we pay 60% of the nation's taxes. It's just because of the administrative reality that companies are headquartered in Bombay. Production happens all over India. The taxes are mailed out from Bombay. So we don't actually pay the taxes of the nation.
For the past few years, Bombay has had some big plans, the Eastern Express Highway, the monorail and the metro. I want to know what you think of these plans.
The great cities that Rana is talking about, everybody moves in public transport. In London and New York, rich people do not own cars. Or if they do, they sort of use them on the weekend. So Bombay is constructed for it. I love that idiotic thing, which is the Bandra Worldly ceiling, because when you get off the ceiling, there's an arrow pointing to South Bombay, but it actually points north. And in Bombay, this is what we've come to believe is an engineering marvel. But even these new sort of public transport things we're building, there's a monorail which they say will start working quite quickly. The monorail in the West is what they use to transport people in fairgrounds. It just doesn't have the capacities to handle the volumes that we need in Bombay. The metro has been overdue and delayed for years and years. The metro, I don't know if I've really seen those metro stations. They open straight onto the street. They don't even open onto the pavement. So this is going to cause more problems. You're going to have, people disgorging themselves into the middle of streams of traffic. The metro and the monorail do not mesh well into the existing train network. I don't know why we have a metro and a monorail rather than having one seamless metro system. So yeah, sort of on the face of it, they're spending money, but they're doing a damn bad job of spending it. It's going to create as many problems as it pretends to solve.